Beyond the Law, a Black Ocean Stowaway short story. Written by J.S. Morin. Narrated by Michael Naramore. Glassware clinked. Half a dozen holoprojectors blared sporting events at varying volumes. Jedward Jeffries had 500 Terras riding on the Sabertooths, covering a 4-point spread against Melbourne Gamma. In his head, as a former agent of Earth Interstellar, he never gambled. Probably couldn't have placed a wager if he tried. From his haircut to the cut of his suit, from his clipped standard English to his rigid posture, every bit of him screamed lawman. And it had been 6 years since they'd given him a plaque and a party and shooed him out into the corrupt galaxy as a civilian. Retired. Drummed out was more like it. "I could have been head of a division," he told the empty tequila glass with the salt missing from one side. "Here he goes again," Gardner called out. It had been Agent Gardner once, same as he'd been Agent Jeffries. 2 years apart at the Earth Interstellar Academy in Indianapolis. 2 weeks apart on the Viking barges that Assistant Director Karjakin had been pushing out to sea with the passengers still technically alive. "I could be heading up CID. They could have put me in incident response." Gardner put an arm across his shoulders. "I know, buddy. I know." What did Gardner know? 40 years, and neither of them had risen above the rank of special agent. Sure, it was a great honor and a privilege and all that malarkey. That was great when you were 30, a few years into a career and on the rise. All he would get out of Gary Gardner was advice on how to be a loser and a cautionary tale in naming kids. "I was an up-and-comer." "Yeah, you were." "I was a go-getter." "Mm-hmm," Gardner agreed mid-chug of his beer. When he put his pint glass down with a thud and a satisfied gasp, he patted the bar top. "Kimmy, 2 more." Jeffries accepted the drink with a nod and a perfunctory toast to his benefactor, then threw back another shot, eyes watering. "You know where it all started to go wrong?" Gardner leaned in, listening, eyes glassy. "It was this lousy bastard." Fumbling around the inside pocket of his suit coat, he pulled out a folded-up advert poster, white at the creases with wear, and spread it atop the bar like a pirate's map. His empty glass became a paperweight. The corners were ragged, where it had once been pinned to a wall. Cheap tint had faded over time and exposure to sunlight. The plastic had warped and wrinkled, but it was still plenty readable. Retro Jukebox presents Squadron 33 and a Third. 3 nights only. Early data classics. Fun for the whole family. The dates had long since passed. The venue wasn't even operating anymore. "Yeah, Jed, we all know." Jeffries narrowed his eyes. His instincts might have been soggy, but they were still sharp. "You making fun of me? You honestly going to tell me that all those crimes, all that evidence, all those witnesses and interagency requests and crimes were my imagination?" "It was real, Jed. We all believed you. Criminals make mistakes, that's all." "Right. Criminals make mistakes." It was a core tenet of the agency. Dogged, diligent, patient, inexorable. Just came if you put in the work, didn't take shortcuts, and gave the system time to chew. The system swallowed everyone if you gave it long enough. "But you can't tell me that one ship being in the middle of dozens of crimes across hundreds of systems is a coincidence. And they made mistakes. I caught them. Over and over and over. And they never let me so much as bring them in for questioning." "You can't just haul in spacers on a hunch," Gardner said offhandedly. "It wasn't a hunch!" Heads turned at nearby tables. When no further outbursts were forthcoming, they all went back to their beers and booze and ball games. "Sure, Jed." Gardner's stool scraped the floor as he got up. That loss of temper had cost Jeffries his sympathetic ear. An Earth Navy vet playing in a novelty guitar band was definitely the head of a major criminal racket. Honestly, if a guy's gonna get married, raise a family, and play 300 gigs a year traveling the galaxy in a rundown starship just to put one over on you, I say you already got him worse than a prison sentence. Catch you round, Jed. Gardner didn't understand. He could never understand. He was happy letting go of the badge and gun, forgetting the criminals that escaped him, and just being Gary Gardner, pensioner. Jedward Jeffries couldn't even introduce himself without his agency title. He just amended a grudging retired at the end. And Carl Ramsey had kept him from ever rising above the rank of special agent. Chicago Prime wobbled under Jeffries' feet as he ambled toward the tram. He didn't give the first worry about being accosted in the alleys he cut through. This wasn't some misbegotten colony. This was Earth. Even a native Martian had to admit that crime basically didn't exist here. Not in the alleys, at any rate. Plenty still took place in the Senate and in corporate boardrooms planet-wide. If any local cops decided to hassle him about packing plasma while he was drunk, Jeffries had two defenses. First of all, he wasn't drunk. Just had a couple drinks. Freebies from old co-workers, even assholes like Gardner, didn't count. Second, come on, man. Come on, man almost always bought a break from a young patrol officer. One quick check of his ID would show the glistening service record of a retired Earth Interstellar special agent and an up-to-date carry permit for plasma weapons. His own department would give any officer sufficient shit for rounding Jeffries up that he was basically untouchable unless he actually did something. The pedestal at the turnstile accepted a thumb scan that doubled as a point upon which Jeffries could regain his balance. He boarded a Blue Line tram outbound and found a seat on a car that was crowded, even at this late hour. A cold, impersonal voice rang out, announcing the stops. Jeffries' datapad chimed with alerts. Brenda. He didn't need her shit right now. They weren't even married. After 2 divorces, he'd learned his lesson there. And without wedding vows, she wasn't entitled to any damned answers he didn't want to give. Where was he? When would he be home? Was he all right? Special Agent Jedward Jeffries had been fired upon in the line of duty. He had likewise returned fire and shot 2 suspects over the course of his long career. He was drinking at a bar in Chicago freaking Prime. He couldn't have been safer with a security detail along. He'd sent real criminals to prison. He didn't need a nanny. A sympathetic ear and a warm presence beside him in bed. If Brenda couldn't be either one, and he wouldn't have been out drinking if she'd listened to him, then what good was she? Irving Park. Jeffries flinched. This was his stop, but he stopped himself instead. The computerized pilot continued rattling off stops as they went. Meanwhile, Jeffries dug around the Omni as he let comm request after comm request go unanswered. O'Hare Starport. When he got off, Jeffries knew where he needed to go. He bought a round-trip fare and boarded the first leg of a series of transports that would bring him to New Garelon. It was a Thursday, and some holiday that kept the local stungy bars closed. The 2 factors balanced out, and the horned toad was hopping. The overheads were projecting lightning effects for the band on stage, with just one at the very back of the bar showing live footage from the Chestnut Tree Festival on silent. From a booth in the middle of the venue, Carl Ramsey swished a mouthful of beer before swallowing it. Hard to get much flavor out of the house brew otherwise, and only the house brew was being comped. Roddy had his allotment loaded into one of the small snorkel hats the Stungies sold for regular-sized species to celebrate. Their opening act was technically blues, not rock, but the distinction ran a little too fine for the proprietor, and they played fine. Carl had snagged a set list, so he knew they had to get backstage and prep for their own gig in a few minutes. There was no song in the Squadron 33 and a Third repertoire that Carl couldn't muddle his way through way drunker than he expected to get tonight. As far as stungy drinking holidays, Chestnut Tree Festival was kind of a dud. Give him Pumpkin Harvest Day any time. There was no reason for beer to be pumpkin-flavored, but there was something else they added that really kicked the stuff into overdrive. Suddenly, Roddy blinked and stood up on the curved bench seat of their booth and gazed in the direction of the entrance.
"Bogey at 3 o'clock!"
Carl craned his neck. "Good thing we'll be done with our set by 11. What am I—" He cut off his own inquiry with a chuckle. "Ho-ho! Look who we've got! Our biggest fan has come to see us after all these years."
"Want us to set up a diversion while you waddle your way out of here?"
Roddy asked.
"What's going on? Who am I looking for?"
Amy inquired. "Cheap suit, cheap haircut, cheap—"
"Got him,"
Amy confirmed.
"What the fuck? I thought they forced him into retirement."
"Maybe he's just a fan." Amy shook her head.
"Fuck that. You've got a family. He couldn't get anything on you and you were still dirty. I'm not letting him get away with—"
As Amy was getting up, she rested a hand on the table. Carl laid his hand atop hers. "Don't. Just leave him be. You don't need to chase a mule around the barn with castration scissors." Amy opened her mouth to object, but couldn't seem to find a place to start. Admittedly, Carl had spent too long around this agrarian megaplanet for his own good. It had started to color his analogies.
"Well, we can't just let him get away with harassing you."
"We won't," Carl promised. He already had his datapad out and was modifying their set list for the night. A guy like that, though, he gets off on getting his authority challenged. I've got something better in the works. He had them. The Horned Toad was an expat bar in an expat town. Everything in both the nightclub and the city was overbuilt to stungy standards, but lent a comforting familiarity with accommodations for human-sized residents. Special Agent Jeffries found himself a seat near the back and watched the washed-up pre-act warm up the audience for the washed-up headliners. As much as he despised this particular bit of self-reflection, he'd come to like Squadron 33 and a Third's music over the years. It had grown on him like a layer of mold he couldn't scrape off. However, the core of law was truth, and he couldn't lie to himself. Something primal spoke to him through the gritty, low-fidelity guitar amplification and the singer's faint New Orleans prime accent, more pronounced when she was off stage. Jeffries knew them all. Jean Yang on drums, ex-Earth Navy starfighter mechanic, a good-natured workhorse who could have made a career for himself in any number of fields related to his naval training. Yaman Dranowell on vocals, former Earth Navy data warfare operative. It had taken years before Jeffries had accessed the band's classified service records to piece together their relationship. They'd all served aboard the ill-fated ENV Odysseus. That was the hook that had dragged her and Niang into this life of crime. Rodek of Keflet was the only one with real talent. Dranowell could sing, but parrots could sing. Four-handed on a double-necked guitar, he played both lead guitar and bass. Squadron 33 and a Third wasted his talent, but not many pros would put up with an alcohol-addicted Laku who was drunk on stage for every performance. And lastly, Bradley Carlin Blackjack Ramsey. Rhythm guitarist, an honorary position if ever there was one in an early data band. While Niang was a workman-like musician, Ramsey was a hack riding the coattails of his friends. Make that accomplices. He was the clue to anyone who was paying attention that Squadron 33 and a Third was a front for a criminal enterprise. How did a band like them keep getting work all these years? How had a working crew on a smuggling vessel transitioned to gig work with no detectable downgrade in lifestyle? After the death of Mordecai the Brown, they'd even brought in an ex-syndicate wizard as a replacement. Couldn't people see? The only completely talentless member of the band, on backup guitars and backup vocals, was somehow their frontman. For what they were getting paid, they shouldn't have been able to afford fuel for the Mobius, let alone feed themselves. They operated almost exclusively in hard currency, even in places where it was all but an admission of criminal intent. Yet he couldn't get a warrant to search their ship? He could almost forgive himself for the early days of his investigation. Almost. The Mobius had been a whirlwind of crime back in those days. They popped up from one corner of Argo space to the next so rapidly that he could hardly have been expected to keep up. Hardly. Warrants expired, had to be replaced, and he'd been before so many boards of inquiry over his expenditures of resources without results. A waiter approached, one of the locals, with a horn band dangling little chains. "Something to drink?" they inquired. The warm-up act had just finished, and Squadron 33 and a Third was taking the stage to replace them. This time there would be no warrant, no judges, no witnesses to recant their statements, no evidence to disappear. Just them, just him. The datapad in his pocket hummed an alert. He pulled it out, shut it off, and set the device face down on the table. Jeffries didn't dare look away from his targets as he answered. "Soda water. I'm working." Electrical feedback hummed. Ancient wiring got itself kicked into places where the band wouldn't trip over it mid-song. Carl shouldered an amp to nudge it a few centimeters out of his way. Roddy fiddled with the knobs on his guitar, which never seemed to make it through the packing and unpacking process without losing its tuning. Yaman studied her lines. "Everything looking okay?"
You sure you ran this all by Pete?
She inquired. Carl hadn't, but that didn't matter. Pete doesn't care. And as far as Carl knew, that may have even been true. Pete Towney was a mop-haired slob with more business acumen than musical taste. That explained how he kept the Horned Toad open, despite booking acts like Neville and the Gang. It was also all Carl could manage not to call him Pete Townsend.
All right. This goes crash loop, it's on y'all. Everything that goes wrong is always Carl's fault,
Roddy cut in, now satisfied with the state of his guitar.
That's been Rule 1 since day 1.
Carl nodded sagely. Truer words. The spotlights hit them. Like a switch had been flipped, the band broke into their opening song. While not something she normally worked from, Yaman used a datapad stand to reference an updated set of lyrics to songs that weren't all standards from their playlist in the first place. Every Breath You Take was a classic, and it was even by a band called The Police. And in case Special Agent Fuckword Jeffries, sitting in the back of the room with a goddamned club soda, was in a dense mood, Carl had rewritten the lyrics. The iconic line, "I'll be watching you," became, "You've been watching me," and it got more pointedly ad hominem from there. "I Shot the Sheriff" now contained a verse about sparing the special agent. They played dirty deeds straight up. Flagrant admission of criminality seemed fine as written. All the while, out in the audience, Amy rolled her eyes and silently pleaded for Carl to quit needling the guy who'd been a pebble in their sock forever. He also noticed when she slipped from their booth, warned Enzio not to follow her, and headed for the washroom. On her way back during the following song, she veered past the special agent's table and swiped the guy's datapad while he wasn't paying attention to it. They eventually finished up their set with the Styx hit Renegade. Heavily customized. "The gig is done, the news is grim. You finally found us. The renegade from retirement came calling with mag cuffs. Sure, some of the rhymes were forced, but Carl had like 15 minutes to whip up changes to 7 out of 8 songs they played. And even from the back of the room, he could tell that the fucker was furious that they were up here making fun of him. After the set, Carl was sweating slug-thrower bullets. He handed off his guitar to one of the backstage people, accepted a beer in exchange, and nodded a quick thanks. In no rush, he chugged as he ambled his way to the guys' dressing room. Yalman had her own. He never made it there. The Horned Toad wasn't the most efficient building in the galaxy. It had been through lives as a dinner theater place and a dance club before its conversion to a bar and stage establishment. While it was tempting to call it a nightclub, Carl couldn't quite squeeze the trigger on that characterization. Felt unfair to places like Dapper's and the Gin and Chronic. Those were fucking nightclubs. The Horned Toad was just a rundown little expat joint with a maze of corridors out back that didn't make any sense if you weren't up to speed on the architectural evolution of the place. It was a perfect backstage mess to get yanked aside by someone with a blaster. Carl hit the wall with the aplomb of a man who'd been thrown against more than his fair share over the years. Tighten core muscles to keep the wind from getting knocked out of you. Lower your chin to keep from cracking your skull. Relax your neck muscles just enough, judging the strength of your assailant so your head lifts, doesn't crack against the wall, and you don't get a case of whiplash. And keep your feet under you. It was an art.
Hi! Don't give me hi, you lousy piece of shit!
Carl huffed a tiny sigh. I've been working, but I can only say, I hope to be an excellent piece of shit someday. You inspire me.
I've had it with you.
The little blaster clenched in the guy's fist was a Yorkshire Dream, basically a miniaturized knockoff of an Earth Interstellar service blaster that was rated for pack and carry in the core. At this range, pressed against his sternum, it might even have been lethal. Look, Jed, it's been fun, but I thought retirement was about letting go of the past.
Letting go? Letting go? You took everything!
What I did or did not take, it certainly wasn't everything. Seriously, have you seen the size of my ship? I couldn't possibly fit everything in it. He grew thoughtful. There was that one time Roddy managed to land the Mobius upside down and claimed we'd just stolen all of Tethys 9. But we stopped letting him park after that.
You ruined me.
I can't vouch for the condition you were in when you got assigned to harass me. Wait, but you never did get assigned, did you? You made a game of chasing me and my friends all across the galaxy. I was barely playing and I still won. And you didn't ruin yourself. You just lost a game you had no business playing.
You've made a career out of bullshit and misdirection, lies and obfuscation. I'm done listening. Move!
Carl kept his hands up and wide and his movements non-threatening. I always say, never argue with a man pointing a micro-blaster at you.
It's not a... Shut up! Move!
Carl had been sure that first drink Jeffries had ordered had been a club soda. If nothing else, they gave him the designated pilot straw color. But after that, Carl had stopped paying attention, and he could smell the booze in the guy's sweat and on his breath. As he marched out of the club at Blaster Point, it seemed his set list may have done too good a job of riling the retired agent. New Garelon had nice wide alleyways between all their buildings, even in the human-occupied sections. Civil ordinances or some bullshit. Also, someone cleaned them? The hell? For what was basically a nothing town, it had the pristine feel of one of the nicer core worlds. The ambiance didn't match the being held at Blaster Point vibe this night needed.
All these years you thought you got away with it.
Without admitting to anything, I have never been prosecuted by Earth Interstellar. Not when you were on the job, not after your retirement. You are still retired, I think it's safe to assume. Jeffries snarled.
Of course no one else took up the case. You destroyed every bit of hard evidence. Witnesses changed their stories or disappeared entirely. I built up a painstaking case from the bits and pieces. Memories with no hard backup. Innuendo. Backup files I couldn't prove weren't fakes because no one was authorized to make official backups. Then, out of nowhere, you change your M.O. The agency tells me to let it rest.
It's called retirement, Carl pointed out. You really should try it. Not, horning in on my gig here, but maybe a nice drumline or brass ensemble, something you can really goose-step to.
You still don't get it, do you?
There's a lot I don't get. You're going to have to be more specific. I've outsourced most of my getting it to Amy. Also, any chance I could put my hands down? I'm unarmed.
No!
I'm looking for some common ground here, Jetty. We're a couple crusty old farts who didn't really even know each other back in the day. I was apparently a bigger deal to you than I'd realized. Or maybe I'd have paid more attention to how you were handling your post-farm noise agency adjustment.
You mean have me killed once I was no longer an agent with Earth Interstellar?
Carl huffed. Look, you want closure? You want an admission out of me, a confession?
Yes!
The barrel of the blaster jabbed forward as if the guy were unfamiliar with how blasters worked. They were trigger-based, not stabby weapons. The little extra momentum from pushing it forward, even while firing it, wouldn't make a bit of difference. Sorry. Been clean all these years. I've crisscrossed the galaxy, delivering here and taking passengers there, and maybe didn't ask a ton of questions your people might have appreciated me keeping documentation for, but I didn't get into the owning my own little freighter gig to become an accountant. Freedom just drives you people orbital. Even if he trusted that Jeffries would let him go after hearing Carl spill his guts, there was always the chance a fucker like this had a recording device. Then again, any record of his current behavior was liable to have him up on charges.
You people? What people? The people who keep the Milky Way safe from the likes of you?
I keep the galaxy safe from the likes of me. I'm perfectly safe to be around, unlike some people waving blasters around a quiet little burb in the middle of the night.
Say it! Say it! Admit you were responsible for the destruction of the Golaglex menagerie. That you ran STEM for the Rucker Syndicate. That you—
Whoa, hold on. Ran STEM? Carl didn't mind being falsely accused of things he'd actually done, but he was no STEM runner. Who said I ran STEM?
Bryce Brisson,
Jeffries snapped.
You remember that name?
You're talking about that time Earth Interstellar actually put a guy on my ship as a passenger and still didn't get anything on me? Jeffries fumed, and it was starting to look like he was ready to see if that little Yorkshire pea shooter was still lethal through a leather jacket at 2-meter range. Then Carl caught a signal from the far end of the alley behind Jeffries. It's all right. I've been messing with you. I saw you in the crowd tonight and sent you a full confession, time delayed to after our set. You should have gotten it by now. Wary eyes tracked Carl. The retired special agent backed away a step, like Carl was in any shape to leap forward and wrest the sorry excuse for a weapon from him. He'd have been safer backing away himself, taking his chances that the thing couldn't inflict more than a bad sunburn if he turned and ran. Instead, Carl held his ground as Jeffries reached into his suit pocket and—
Where's my datapad?
He demanded. He switched to a two-handed grip, basically holding onto his hand since he couldn't physically find room on the tiny blaster for more fleshy contact with it.
I want answers!
Jed?
Carl breathed a sigh of relief. Special Agent Jeffries turned at the sound of that voice. A woman, probably mid-40s, human, dressed unfashionably for interstellar travel on budget starliners, raced down the alley toward him. Hell, someone actually loved this sorry excuse for a man. Amy had been at the woman's side, and she'd given back Jeffries' datapad, which waved in the air with each running step. Carl slowly backed away as the woman careened into the retiree. On his way back in through the Horned Toad's employee entrance, Carl gave Enzio a nod that it was all clear. That stupid fucker had no idea how close he'd come to turning into a pile of ash that no one would ever recover. Carl had been in no real danger. Once the dining area had cleared out, it was just employees and talent left in the Horned Toad. Danny and Jill washed the floors. Charmaine tidied up the bar. Slim Timmy helped a bunch of aging musicians haul their gear back to their dressing rooms. Not that Carl didn't help. He was just a supervisory sort of help. "Can you believe that guy?" he commented as he followed Slim Timmy and his favorite amp through the back halls. "Still thinks he's Earth Interstellar."
"You and him got history, huh?"
Slim Timmy asked.
"Oh, don't,"
Amy warned. "History?" Carl chuckled.
"Nah, history is written by winners."
My history doesn't even mention that loser. Sure, we were riding high and playing loose back in the day, but nothing like Earth Interstellar should have cared about. A dine and dash when times were tight. An argument over fuel prices that might have run afoul of some credit laws. Piddly stuff. Enzio trailed along with one of the spare guitars over his shoulder like a caveman's club. He grunted.
"One way to write it, that's for sure."
"Quiet, you. You weren't even around for most of the real fun." Roddy toddled along. Long coils of primitive sound wire and cables hung from his shoulders.
"I admit nothing. I don't know you people. If you want answers to any questions prior to yesterday, contact my attorney. His name is Datnun of Ya Business."
Piloting a manual dolly with one of the speakers, Yaman couldn't help chipping in with her two terras.
"Jeffries is the sort who follows the footprints that match the novelty Bigfoot slippers you bought to have a laugh at him. You be getting all kinds of rile when no one takes his proof as a real thing."
"I always felt bad for the guy," Niang commented. He was the only one allowed to haul the drum kit, except for that one time he had a bum knee and no one could convince him to see a doctor about it. Only took one busted kick pedal for him to get to a free clinic and repair a torn ACL. I mean, he did what he thought was his job. When I first heard of him, he'd been on your asses for years. No one gets credit for doing his job if it's not what his boss is paying him for, Carl reasoned. That's a crusader. A dumb crusader. You want to hunt people down with no evidence and a bunch of hunches and innuendo, that's what a mask and a silly name are for. You work on the Justice Farm, you've got to follow barn protocol. Amy trailed in the band's wake.
"I just hope the jerk is all right. Maybe you guys weren't criminals back in your wild and loose days, but you've got to admit you kind of looked like it."
"I admit nothing," Carl declared, toasting with a beer from a case no one else had gotten to yet. "But here's to Jedward Jeffries, putting the special in special agent. May he be cured of his delusions about my character." Cream-colored walls and muted brown leather furniture dominated the office of Dr. Sakura Vasquez. She had short, straight hair and designer data lenses that barely gave a glint from the far side that they were active. Her face sported the exact right amount of Cosmo tints to appear as if she wasn't wearing any at all. But Special Agent Jedward Jeffries had made a career out of picking up on little details. Today, however, he was the one under scrutiny.
"I'm glad you decided to seek help."
Brenda gave Jed's hand a squeeze.
"We've talked about it a lot. He's been sober almost a month. It seemed like the right time. There's never a wrong time to talk to someone.
Dr. Sakura explained. It felt like a breach of protocol to mix a title and a first name, but she'd insisted.
Care to talk a little about how you came to your decision that now was your time?
Jed took a deep breath. This was his penance. This was the cost of keeping Brenda. He had a load of baggage he was dragging with him, and if he had to choose between the baggage and her, he was choosing her 10 times out of 10. But the baggage wouldn't stay put without help.
When I took the agency's retirement package, a euphemism for quit or we'll fire you, they had me checked out by one of their own people, a pros pro. Taught at Indianapolis. Maybe still does for all I know. Either way, half an hour and he said I was fine.
He wasn't fine,
Brenda commented. Jed shook his head.
No. I left the blaster and the badge and the keycard and the desk behind. Everything else came with me. All my open cases. All the shit I'd done to get myself on the outs with the directors. Good stuff happened in my career. I closed cases. I got justice for victims of hundreds of crimes. I've gotten awards, had my pics snapped with senators. There's a woman in Boise Prime who still sends me a spice cake every Christmas for catching her son's kidnappers.
The cakes aren't very good.
Why aren't those chasing me in my sleep?
Dr. Sakura looked up from her datapad.
Well, why don't we talk a little about your sleeping?
They delved into Jed's nightmares of no one believing him, no one believing in him, constantly fighting a battle with truth as his only weapon against lies his superiors all believed, in spite of him.
That must have been hard.
It wasn't hard. It was impossible,
Jed snapped.
I was right, damn it.
Brenda gave the doctor a tight-lipped smile that said, "See, this is why we're here."
I know,
Jed muttered.
It's not my job to care anymore. But it was never my job to care in the first place. Caring is bad police work. Facts, evidence, arrests, convictions.
It bothers you when criminals go free, doesn't it?
Yes!
Dr. Sakura nodded impassively. She appeared to have the whole not her job to care bit down pat.
I see. Have you considered that some of the behaviors you're describing are probably at least bordering on criminal?
Jed bristled.
I didn't mention any specifics of my case.
Stalking, carrying a weapon on a non-carry world, holding a citizen at blaster point? If you read these actions on a report, no names, just the facts of what took place, how would you describe them?
With a mouth suddenly full of sour milk, Jed admitted the obvious.
Crimes.
To an extent. These were all activities that your former job sanctioned.
Yeah, but I'm not an agent anymore,
he complained. Dr. Sakura inclined her head.
That's right. You're not. You spent a whole career within a particular set of exceptions to rules and laws. You had a unique niche you occupied, and now you're being asked to follow a new set of rules, obey laws that didn't used to apply to you. How do you feel about that?
Cheated.
Jed!
He turned to Brenda.
No, I mean it. I had a chance to do so much good in the galaxy.
You did enough.
I could have done...
You did enough.
Brenda restated more firmly.
Let it be someone else's turn. I want to take that vacation to the outer colonies. I want to root for my nephew's football team with you at my side. I want to tour the 12 great cities. We've talked about how we wanted to spend your retirement, but you still haven't finished getting to retirement.
You get where I'm coming from, Doctor?
Jed asked. There was a plea in his eyes. He wasn't married. Still didn't want to, but Brenda was liable to be the last woman to ever care about him this deeply again, and he couldn't risk losing her. Dr. Sakura offered a reserved, professional smile. She reached into a desk drawer and withdrew a headband.
This is a REM inhibitor. I'd like you to start wearing it, let's say, 5 nights a week. Dreams are important to mental health, but so is restful sleep. Next week, we'll start getting into the details of those dreams, figure out how we can redirect your mind to more peaceful, pleasant subjects. How does that sound?
Jed stood, taking the headband with one hand and shaking the doctor's with the other.
That sounds great.
Thank you so much,
Brenda added. As they headed back onto the streets of Chicago Prime, Jed looked forward to finding a night's sleep without Carl Ramsey there taunting him. Thanks for listening to this Black Ocean adventure. This mission may be over, but there's plenty more for you to enjoy. For more magical mischief in the 26th century, search Black Ocean on your favorite audiobook store or visit blackoceanmissions.com. This has been Beyond the Law, a Black Ocean Stowaway short story. Written by J.S. Morin. Narrated by Michael Naramore. Copyright 2025 by J.S. Morin. Production copyright 2025 by J.S. Morin.